What may be seen as just a game is so much more. Under the surface, countless stories reveal aspects of human nature that will forever remain untold. Here on Philosophy, we will tell those stories. This is Philosophy, Video Game Philosophy. I am David Leibowitz, and time to get the spiel for your enlightenment. Game starts. Hello everyone, this is David Leibowitz with Philosophy, Video Game Philosophy. We are finally done with Persona 5 Strikers for now, and we are moving on to a very highly requested episode, Fallout New Vegas. And I put myself through the torture of a 6-hour playthrough with my friend and special guest, Joshua Shapin. Josh, want to introduce yourself?
Alright, hello everyone. My name is Joshua Shapin. Like David said, I played through the sort of like a sped up playthrough of Fallout New Vegas. We went through the Mr. House storyline. I also know David from college. I'm a philosophy major. These kinds of conversations are the ones that I like to have and have often. And I'm also, avid video gamer. I play Fallout New Vegas quite a bit in my free time. So I'd love to sit down with David and talk about what kinds of ethical dilemmas we can come across and who exactly is the right choice to make in the final playthrough.
That is the question of this. Who is the right choice? And I'm, again, really excited for this. Of a special notice, of course, is if Caesar is right or not, or if there's anything right to Caesar. But how about, but Josh is much better than me at philosophy, so it's awesome to have someone to really have this great discussion. No offense to Magic. Magic is fantastic as well, but especially on the AI episode. But let's take it away. Josh, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess I wanted to note here at the beginning that Fallout New Vegas, as a general story, sort of takes the player on a path and pushes them towards, I feel, different avenues. If you are a kind of role-playing game player that likes to just kind of go through the storyline as it's presented to you, one, you'll find that Fallout New Vegas is a rather short game, and two, you might not really find the nuance that makes it so special, and that makes some of the storylines a lot more palatable and, recognizably a live choice for you. I think that the game does put a big emphasis on Mr. House, maybe just because that is the first character that you really encounter. Throughout the beginning of the game, you're presented with Victor, who saves you, digs you out of the grave, and then he tells you to go meet Mr. House, right? So you go through the storyline trying to track Benny, who's the person that shot you. You end up meeting Mr. House. And really, unless you go on what the game would consider the off the beaten track and confront Benny before Mr. House, then you may encounter Yes Man first, right? But that's not necessary because it's sort of like a side quest you have to do. But in general, you go to Mr. House, then he presents you with sort of his imagining of how New Vegas should be, the whole society. And so I'll present that here. Basically, what happens is that Mr. House is a technocrat. He is one of the founders of Vault Tech, which is, in the Fallout universe, a very big deal because a lot of the storylines start with a player in a vault, and that's one of the ways that people really survived the nuclear war. And so what happened with Mr. House is that he's still alive because of different technologies he's acquired. But he has fitted the Lucky 38 casino where he is at, and the area around the strip with these sort of Iron Dome like uh, missiles and defense mechanisms, so that 200 years prior, when the nuclear war actually happened, the strip and the casino were actually protected, right? And so he thinks that not only does he have the capabilities of protecting New Vegas from further destruction as human civilization sort of rebuilds itself, and protecting its inhabitants, uh, he sort of feels like he has a right to the sort of the Mojave, or the greater New Vegas area. One of his missions is to take control of the Hoover Dam, which is the big conflict point between a lot of the uh, factions. We have the Legion, the NCR. They're going to have the second battle of Hoover Dam, and if you choose to side with Mr. House, you're going to take it for yourself, or really for Mr. House. And so we sort of have this ethical dilemma of, well, does he really have the rights to these kinds of areas? Because does he have the authority to displace everyone else, really anybody that he wants, and just have him be sort of like a dictator of the New Vegas Strip area?
Yes, I think that's a
Yeah,
good.
David, did you want to go on?
I mean, you again, you know a lot more about this game than I do. I just walked through a Mr. House playthrough and have a good idea about each of the factions. Should we debate? Should we talk about Mr. House, or should we continue to the other three factions before we get back to the
Yeah,
between?
talk about each of them, and then sort of debate, what we think is right and wrong about each of them.
You definitely know more about the NCR because you just told me about the NCR. I really do, but I trust you in what you said about the NCR. I guess I could. Do you want me to talk about the Legion?
Yeah, sure, you can talk about the Legion.
So the Legion, from what I've seen, is basically is a complete counterpoint to the NCR. So the NCR is what you think of as a democratically elected government. The problem is that they are completely corrupt and power hungry, and not from outside sources of money. They just really just do not care at all, really, about democracy. And Joshua will definitely say more about that, but the Legion basically sees this, and you have Caesar, or Kaizar, because that's the correct Roman Latin pronunciation, who it was an avid book nerd and studied up on the Roman Empire and realized that and Hegel, and realized that this would be the right way to do it. That if he basically has this idea of, this is what my friend wanted me to talk about, Hegelian dialects, that these two opposite sides of history, basically with Hegel, is that history constantly goes back and forth, and that there's 2 points there's the current track and then there's an opposite track, and if you put them together, you'll get a synthesis that is perfect. So the antithesis to a quote unquote democratically elected government is its worst nightmare, which is a fascist dictatorship. Now, it's obviously not fully fascist, but it's still slightly on the line of Mussolini, but it's bringing back the Roman Empire in its purest sense, with probably some misreadings, as we can maybe talk about some of those misreadings. But he believes that this society, under Kaizar society, in which everyone must agree, there will be no conflict, and maybe after some while there will be a better society that will merge from that. Was that a good explanation from what I know?
Yeah, I think the biggest point that Kaizar really makes here is that how he built the Legion is to be the antithesis to the NCR, such that it's justificatory for him to be this kind of dictator, or have these slaves and things like that, in order to, once the NCR and the Legion essentially merge or fight each other, that something greater will come about from that. And I think that whether or not that's true, we can argue about, and really, I don't know if there's anything we can say about whether or not it's true, but we can say that we can analyze the means in which he is employing and say whether that's actually justified, and what kind of society would have to emerge to justify his means, if you want to have the the ends justify the means kind of perspective, which maybe Kaizar has.
Joshua is a big Kantian, and I'm not going to go into that, but yes, Joshua is going to probably constantly emphasize the importance of the means at which things are happening. We do not fully share this view, though I think we both believe in the sense of human dignity. Exactly. I think that came out especially in one of my recent philosophy courses about respect, responsibility, and ethics that Josh and I were in, and we took Aristotle's ethics together, and that was a interesting class to say the least, but learned some interesting stuff. Aristotle may or may not show up. We'll see. But yeah, do you want to move on to the NCR? I guess to see what.
Yeah, sure. I can explain a little bit of the NCR.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically the NCR is what is basically kind of like a reimagining of the United States government. Not necessarily the Enclave, which is a different faction in former games, which is really a continuation of the United States government. But this is a complete reimagining where ideally you have democratically elected officials and voting rights for the people, and also care for their citizens, such that citizens always have access to clean water and they're not being attacked by raiders, or they at least have reasonable protections against raiders and different things in the wastelands. But if you don't go on a lot of different side quests and talk to people in Fallout New Vegas, you might find that that's perfectly reasonable to think that that's true. But really, if you talk to all these people and do a bunch of side quests, you'll find out that these settlers do not have access to clean water even when they're promised it from the NCR government. Or you find out that the NCR is responsible for protecting different villages and things, but really they're nowhere to be found. And this is something that Kaizar talks about when he talks about the NCR, is that their failing is that their ideal is not being implemented at all. They might be efficient, but they're not actually succeeding. You never hear of any citizens of the Mojave, of New Vegas, having any voting rights. The government is completely abstracted from the Mojave region. All of the decisions about the people living in New Vegas and the Strip and the greater Mojave area are actually being determined by the government out west in California. That's why they're called the New California Republic, and this game takes place in Nevada. And do you really question whether or not that their ideals are being met at all? You think, well, they're a democracy, but right now they're sort of acting like a totalitarian regime, even if it's there's multiple people. It's a bureaucracy, really. All of these people who are making decisions about people that did not accept them and have no right, or no rights to change what they're doing. They don't represent the people.
Yes.
And so it's obviously they're not killing people or enslaving people like Kaizar is, but they have their own problems, and I think the game sort of does a disservice to them, because the only way to sort of figure out the dilemma is to do all these other things. And so that's why I wanted to explain, sort of get right into the dilemma on them, because normally you probably wouldn't get that opinion out if you just did the playthrough of the NCR.
Exactly. And I guess there's definitely would you say they're similar to, you would say, I think certain quote unquote presidents in the Middle East, like I think the president of Syria is a president. Am I correct? I mean, I believe there's certain, like, basically people who call
it something like that. I'm not sure.
I mean, but basically a government where they say it's a president, but it's a rigged election, or just no voting rights whatsoever, or are there people that are voting?
Well, I believe there are people that are voting, but none of the people that are voting are in the Mojave region, which is the people that we're supposed to be caring about, right? All of the people that are voting are, in California. They're off there, and they're making decisions about people in Nevada who don't have any voting rights or representation,
So what you're
which is
saying?
the problem.
So you're saying it's the Hollywood libs that are controlling everything?
Yeah, basically.
All right, I guess like, Yes Man's probably the simplest one, but the most abstract as well. I guess I'll explain less.
Yeah, I'd definitely say so.
Yes, definitely. Yes Man is basically so Benny was a robot that killed no, Benny's not the Benny killed you. He's not a robot. He's a real person, and basically once he leaves the building and he's captured by Kaizar, Yes Man is a robot that cannot say no. So you basically, if you go on Yes Man's route, can just do the exact thing that Betty wanted to do, but of course, assumingly you're a much better person. But again, anything could happen. There are things that still happen in the ending, and they do seem to be good. And Joshua was a Yes Man proponent for a while, but he does have a way to my maybe possible quandaries about Yes Man. But basically, that's it. Yes Man is just the simple idea of if you're thinking of a being that could not tell you no. But the good thing is that you are the good person, allegedly. So that's Yes Man, basically.
Yeah, I think a Yes Man's ethics is really just what is the character of the player controlling him, right? If the player is an evil person, role-playing as an evil person, say, or genuinely is, then we could say, yeah, Yes Man is not the good option, because evidently the courier, who is commanding Yes Man, is not a good person. And it's just a direct reflection of the courier's karma or morality. But then,
Does that actually happen in the game, or will good springs always be good under Yes Man?
I believe, well, there is a karma system, and I'm not sure how much it actually affects the game, but I do believe it affects the ending slides. So I'm not exactly sure if the outcome of Good Springs changes if you are a very evil character. But I know in our playthrough, the ending was of neutral, because we didn't really do anything other than do the main storyline.
We also expedited the playthrough by murdering an innocent old lady. Okay.
Did we do that?
Okay,
yeah, that was the boomers.
Okay, she wasn't that innocent, but she still let it happen. So I guess she's not innocent, but you still murdered.
Yeah, see, this is sort of like the problem, because I guess I want to get back a little bit to Mr. House, because one of the dilemmas and problems I would have with Mr. House is that he asks the courier, the player, to exterminate the Brotherhood of Steel.
Yes.
Right? And you have to have a very good reason, right? You have to have a good reason for murder, essentially.
Yes.
A good enough reason to make it not murder anymore. Now, if you know a lot about the game, or you've played it multiple times, or the other games, you might have an opinion of the Brotherhood of Steel that justifies that, right? There's a lot of things that they do as a organization and what they believe in that is, I would say, immoral, right? So the Brotherhood of Steel as an organization, they believe in the sequestering and accumulation of old world or pre-war technology, because they believe that people should not be able to have access or use the kind of technology that caused the nuclear war in the first place. And so basically they just go around and steal or kill people who have that kind of technology to take it for themselves. Now, whether they use it or not, I believe they do, right? The power armor is one example. Power armor was developed prior to the nuclear war for the U.S. military, and they are the primary users of it, we say, in the Fallout New Vegas world. That's just one example, right? In Fallout New Vegas, they don't do any of those things, or they aren't really seen to do any of those things. You would have to play, Fallout 3 or prior games to really know about their history.
Are the worlds is all the tales of Fallout connected?
Yeah, so they are all connected, but
Okay.
you are living in the world as different characters.
Right.
So, you might come in with your knowledge of Fallout 3 into New Vegas and say, oh, I don't really like the Brotherhood, or maybe I don't really I hate the Enclave, and so in Fallout New Vegas you're gonna go kill the remaining members, something like that. But really, you're a different character, and
Yeah.
as a role player, you probably should take that knowledge away and say, okay, let me give them the benefit of the doubt, because maybe you'll find out, say, you join the Brotherhood of Steel, or you meet them with Veronica, who is a companion character that allows you access freely to the Brotherhood of Steel bunker. And maybe you learn, oh, there's some good people here. Maybe they're worth saving, and maybe I can change their ways. Something like that. Optimistic. Uh, but I will say that if you do not take Veronica with you, right, and instead you go find three basically platoons of dead Brotherhood soldiers who were sent on a mission, you find in each of their bodies part of a passcode, and then you can bring that passcode back if you find them to the bunker. You can say that, and then you're able to access the bunker. But they actually put a bomb collar on your neck and say you need to get rid of this NCR soldier that's in a adjacent bunker, or we're gonna blow your head off, essentially. Or if you tell him where we are, something like that. And so obviously in our playthrough and in any other playthrough, the Mr. House uh, vendetta against them might not be justified. But, you know, if you yourself are, put in a bomb collar and said you need to murder or lie to somebody or get rid of them somehow or we're going to kill you, I feel like that's a pretty good reason to think that they're bad people. But
Do they
obviously,
deserve to die?
it's
Do they deserve to die if Mr. House didn't put a gun to your head? Maybe not, but I mean, I would think you as a Kantian would say that murder is usually not good, but I mean, they wouldn't
yeah.
deserve.
I mean, personally, I would say that even if Mr. House had a gun to your head, which he does not in the game, uh, it would still be wrong to murder them unreasonably so, right? If
Yes.
you have some kind of justificatory reason, something like they tried to kill me, or something like that that justifies your killing of another. Self-defense is often used, right, in the legal system, even across the world today. That's the
Like
kind of reason that would be okay for using force enough to kill somebody.
like the powder gangers, I guess. No, but no, you still technically go out to kill the powder gangers.
Well, you're right. So with the power gangers, when they attack Goodsprings, uh, you are really defending yourself for this town of otherwise innocent people. These powder gangers are literal criminals who said, "Oh, this is our territory now, and we're just gonna rough you guys up, and or just kill everybody and take over the town." That's the kind of uh, event that justifies lethal force.
Mm-hmm. All
And I,
right, we
I
should
feel
probably.
like the Brotherhood, you can describe the Brotherhood in ways that makes it so you are justified in getting rid of them.
All right, we should go back to then. What does that say about Miss? So we've talked about what that says about the Brotherhood. Now, what does that say about Mr. House?
Yeah, so I think with Mr. House, uh, the problem is that he does not even consider whether or not to negotiate with them or communicate with them at all. He just wants you to go there, get access to the bunker, and initiate the self-destruct sequence, which in the end would kill everyone in the bunker because nobody escapes, or maybe a few people escape. Uh, but basically, the problem, or the dilemma that arises with this, is that if you do go into the Brotherhood bunker, you will meet people and talk to people that are, you would think, are seemingly good people, right? They're not the kind of people who would, uh, you know, be okay with killing a group of civilians for their laser rifles or something like that. But also the problem is that they are aware that the Brotherhood does these kinds of things, and they are aware of the history and the meaning the Brotherhood has in, these kinds of technologies. And so you might say, well, even if they wouldn't do it themselves, they are supporting it and, providing their support directly to these kinds of endeavors. That's a kind of justification you can give.
What about now, I guess, so the boomers, we did that just to expedite the playthrough.
Yeah.
So you could have negotiated with them. It would just take
Yeah, so in every playthrough, other than the Mr. House, I believe, with the Brotherhood of Steel, you're allowed to negotiate with them. Possibly the Kaizar playthrough, you might have to eliminate them as well. But I'm not exactly sure. I haven't played the Kaizar playthrough in a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think
the boomers. What about the boomers and
yeah, with the boomers specifically, you're allowed to negotiate with them and have them on your side of the final battle at Hoover Dam, no matter what playthrough you go through.
And what about and the Mafia was a special case because that was more just dealing with the leader, and you seemingly had to kill the leader.
So for that one, I believe that there are ways to befriend them, but that requires a bunch of side quests and things that I wasn't prepared to do with our playthrough. I believe you had to do different things in a different chronology.
That didn't involve stealing Benny the guy's wallet and stuff, or his notebook.
Yeah, no, you don't necessarily have to do that. I believe there is a way to go through the game without actually doing anything that like a moral saint would consider wrong. One of the ways would be to do all of the Omerta's side quests, and the Omertas is the one group of people you're talking about, like the Mafia.
They're the Mafia, basically.
You don't necessarily have to steal the guy's journal to find out about the things. That just expedites it. You can talk to him and talk to the bosses, and they'll give you your the key to his room or something like that. You can search it, or I believe you can just pay them off. That's one of the ways.
Right. I think we spent a lot of time, Mr. House. I guess we should.
Yeah.
I guess since we're talking about Mr. House. Okay, so he didn't intend for you to kill the Emertas. The only person he wanted you to kill was the Brotherhood of Steel, and we just ended up killing all of them, except we didn't actually. The guy did take up over the. So yeah, basically killed everyone. So what does that say about Mr. House? Why? I guess. How about let's put it up against before we have the big two options. Let's put it right. Should we put it right up against Yes Man right now, or should we put Mr. House against the other two options first before we? I wouldn't have Yes Man as the final.
I think we can either one you want first.
What are you feeling? What do you feel? Yes Man feel no. How about let's put him against NCR and Kaizar first because Yes Man's the longest, most convoluted discussion.
Yeah, sure. Let's put him against the NCR. I think that's a good idea.
Why is a corrupt? He's not corrupt, but why is a casino boss better than a corrupt democracy that's not really democracy? Okay, I think what makes unfettered capitalism better than corrupt bureaucracy, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think they're similar in many ways because both the NCR and Mr. House are imputing themselves into others people's business and saying, I have the rights to this land or something like that, right? In terms of property rights, I think Mr. House really does believe that he owns the strip, right? He charges the tribes, the Omertas and the White Glove Society and the others, rent. He collects parts of the money that they earn, some kind of taxation scheme.
The Omertas live in are right next to the
yeah, they live in the strip, right? And Mr. House controls the strip,
right?
But I think there's a question here because, Mr. House, when he was alive, or not alive, but, before the war, he didn't actually own that land, right? He had to wait after he, protected the land from being, or the buildings on it from being destroyed by the nuclear weapons. He had to wait at least until the people who were the owners of those died, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that, just protecting the land itself, that doesn't give you the right to ownership. Even if everything was destroyed on it by the nukes, that doesn't mean that the person who owned it before, the little parcel, that they no longer own that, right? And so it's sort of like Mr. House is disrespecting, whoever owned it before, or wronging them. Maybe they're dead, long dead, and they don't have anybody alive to pass it down to, right? But he doesn't, he never refers to that or even talks about it, so we can't know what he's thinking. And then with the NCR, it's sort of like the same thing. They're imputing themselves as a government onto these people who don't wish for them to be ruled by that government. And maybe that's not so bad, but it's even worse that they're not a representative government, at least for the people that they're imputing on.
All right.
But I think that the Mr. House way, in terms of the property rights there, is better because you can say some kind of argument like, well, the people who owned that land before, they're long dead, or maybe they even died in the nuclear war, right? And Mr. House is the only one left, and so he, built his robots, sent them out to rebuild, and now he, controls it. But you also might say something like, well, without a government, and without, fair taxation and representation, property rights are not really a thing.
Well, Mr. House might be a Reaganite and have low taxes. He might. We don't know.
Well, it's hard to say that he believes in no taxes when he himself is, charging all of these people for, protection services, essentially, with his Protectrons, his robots.
So then he's not a Reaganite. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a autocrat, really.
Yeah. All right. But I guess one thing in is that I would say Mr. House is slightly more of the way of the future, because I think that brings up why he's so against the Brotherhood of Steel, is that he has these Securitrons that are very advanced technology. I mean, obviously this is, I think, 2200, so it's definitely not the future you think of, but of course this is the whole point. It's the future stuck in the past. But he still believes in it. He's like all about the way of the future. So he, seemingly with his most advanced technology, as you said, would probably pave the way better than the NCR. The question is, I'm gonna wager then is, I guess maybe I should give this a go and give my friend what he wants about Kaizar. Yeah, I guess putting now Kaizar into the ring against NCR and Mr. House. I guess I'm gonna let me try to give Kaizar the biggest benefit of a doubt. No, I'm not going to give any supplications against what he's doing. He's doing everything wrong. He's murdering whole towns and all that. But let's just say that for some Hegelian miracle, he actually makes a just society. I know you as a Kantian would say it's not worth it, but I guess the question is, obviously we would think of how long that society would be. And would he, I mean, there are people that are, as you've told me, online that are for the Legion and such, that legit believe in it. So therefore that means that there is, obviously, if you were to wait long enough, there is possibly a way, if this synthesis between the two antitheses were to happen, might work, but it seemingly believes that honestly, similar to the Yes Man case, who's going to rule after? Actually, no, that's not the case. Kaizar is Legate, but I believe they're probably both the same age. Legate might be older. It looks kind of older. Um, so I guess with that in mind, is there any way maybe if you take off your Kantian hat to consider Kaizar, or can you never take that hat off for Kaizar?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the point about how Mr. House is sort of like the way of the future, right? He seems to be someone who is propelling human civilization, just a little bit forward with his technology and different things where, the strip, at the very least, is prospering. It's the highlight of the Nevada civilization. And so we might say, that's a good opportunity then to have that spread out and make sure that all these people are prospering, right? When you were talking before with me privately, that you were sort of judging a lot of these people on how prosperous Good Springs is, or would be, right? Because they're just some old town of well-minded people who are just minding their own business, right? How are they going to fare under these different governments?
They fare the best under Mitchell
And,
House.
right? And obviously, we don't want to just focus on them, but take like a theoretical town, a small town in Nevada. How are they going to fare? And I think that definitely, if we went with the Mr. House route, the amount of prospering they would have, this theoretical town, would definitely depend on how far away they are from the strip, right? It's going to take a long time for them to really feel the benefits of having Mr. House protect the strip and slowly expand.
That is
And
trickle
then,
down. That is trickle down economics in a sense, though.
yeah, basically, if ever. And then we have Kaizar, who one of his promises is to make sure that everyone is protected from raiders. He's going to completely wipe away any and all tribes and raiders in the Mojave, right? And I believe him. I think he's going to be successful in that. Uh, that's his benefit. His benefit is I'm going to wipe away all these people, right? But the problem is that Good Springs, or the theoretical town, isn't actually going to exist anymore at that point, I think.
That's the
They're all going to
problem.
be maybe enlisted in the army or enslaved, something like that. And they're still going to be centered around the Rome or the fort, right?
Yeah.
And maybe then he's going to be trying to like create some kind of strip-like area without the casinos, just like this center of civilization. But even then, I think Kaisar misreads a lot of information about the Roman Empire and how they were successful. One of the things that Kaisar does not permit is the use of any really like medicine or drugs. Only things that you can make naturally, right?
So he's a hippie.
And
So he's a hippie in a sense, a weird kind of hippie.
yeah, so there's this healing item in Fallout New Vegas called healing powder, and that's really like the only thing that people are allowed to use in the Legion. But the player, as if you played, will know that stim packs are the thing that heals you, right? That's what you use when you're in a gunfight or something, or Deathclaw attacked you, and you need a health item. You use a stim pack, and that's a sort of like a futuristic technology with stem cells, where it sort of like accelerates the healing process of your own body, infinitely, and heals your body instantaneously if you're in the standard mode, or a little like over 10 seconds in hardcore mode. Uh, but yeah, so in a way, even if Kaizar removed all the threats people would face, they would still face sort of internal threats. They wouldn't be as prosperous, right? They wouldn't have access to all these health items and different ways of life that they already have. They'd be, you know, their identities would be cast away in favor of legionary. or Kaizar supporter.
And here's the big thing about that, which we discussed during the playthrough. From my knowledge of pre-modern Jewish history, since I took that class, as both of us are Jewish, I'm full, he's half. But basically, under the Roman Empire, Jews were 20% of the population. They were the highest amount of possible. And why am I mentioning Jews? Well, I don't need to just mention Jews. I can mention that the Roman Empire welcomed in Egyptian gods or any other god that they took over into their pantheon. You did have to submit to Rome, just like you have to submit to Kaizar. And that was a big thing, I believe, against Christians until they converted. But Jews that issue, but they seemingly got around fine, were treated the best until Constantine. Seemingly, Kaizar is a homogenous Marxian kind of way where there is no identity, and fascist as well, Marxian/fascist kind of way, where, obviously taking different lines away, but where there is one identity and that's it. Does not permit different identities, and that's the other big difference problem with the way Kaizar goes about. I think one other is, you said that the Roman Empire went out and killed 20% of the population, while Kaizar kills everyone but one. Is that correct?
Oh yes, that was about Kaizar's practice of decimation. Basically, when a Roman legion, which is one of their battalions, did some kind of wrong, failed in battle, or aided the enemy, something like that, they would punish every 10th man, and you would know if you were lined up to be the 10th man. It's sort of like a group punishment, right? But Kaizar in Fallout New Vegas, instead of decimating his legions, he actually just killed everyone other than one person to remember it. And while both of those practices might be morally wrong or just ineffective, Kaizar in Fallout New Vegas definitely takes it to an extreme, probably unnecessarily.
Yes. So I think, so it seems like, but is there any, what if a miracle, prosperous utopia were to come from Kaizar? Do you believe him at all, or do you just not see it at all, that the synthesis could come together with the Hegelian dialects? Do you not see it at all?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, I don't really see the ability for Kaizar's legion to result in anything prosperous for the grand majority of people. One of the things that made the Roman Empire so successful and so prosperous was that they were accepting of all kinds of identities and religions, yes, so long as you respected the Roman pantheon, exactly, right? Well, not necessarily the pantheon,
yes,
totally,
yes,
but pantheon, just the emperor.
The emperor, and basically, as long as you respected the Roman pantheon, in a sense, you accepted Rome. But yes,
exactly.
I believe you were supposed to show up to services or something, but you could still be you. You could still be you. Again, as I said, Jews, Egyptians, all of that. They accepted.
Yeah, and that's why when Rome came to a new land and took over, that all of the people sort of just integrated into Rome and became Roman citizens. There were a lot of benefits to being a Roman citizen. You had protection and clean water and all these different things that you might not have had otherwise. You had legal protections. People couldn't steal from you. Otherwise, you could go to court, right, and defend yourself. And you had all these rights that you wouldn't normally have if you were the small guy.
And I guess I'm going to go on just a brief little tangent about Rome, in the sense that I think a better depiction that doesn't obviously base itself off of Rome, but is probably based off of Rome, in a sense, though there is an actual Greek/Roman area in the game, in the game series League of Legends. There is Noxus, which over time turned into an interesting foil to Demacia, who were originally just the overall good guys, and Noxus was the bad guys. Demacia turned into a fascist state that looked prosperous overall, but persecuting agents. Noxus, on the other hand, is completely accepting of all people, of all different cultures. You have someone like Samira coming in, who's clearly Middle Eastern coming from Shurima to be a Noxian mercenary, and all they do is they value your strength. So they obviously do a lot of bad things, but that's still the Roman Empire probably portrayed better. That just gave me an idea for a Noxus episode. But Ionia is going to be next for League of Legends. We do have League of Legends coming up. Noxus might come later. But yeah, so
that sounds a lot.
That sounds like what Rome would do, right?
Yeah, that sounds a lot like the real Rome, where it mattered if you were strong or smart, right, like a philosopher. But it also didn't matter if you came, where you came from, what color you were, what religion you had. Mm-hmm. All of these things, they didn't matter, right?
Exactly.
Rome wanted you because you made Rome in general more prosperous, having more people, more workers, all of these things. You were valued.
Exactly.
I don't see that kind of picture of Rome in Kaizar's Rome, right? Fallen to Vegas.
All right, then I guess we have the final contender. Though certain other issues about Fallout, and maybe even Fallout in general, come to mind, because I don't know if you would like to show me more Fallout games, we can go through them, but it seems like New Vegas was the biggest hot topic. But I guess I might want to deal with the general ideas of Fallout in general, but the focus is which faction. So now, I guess it seems like the public's favorite faction is the Yes Man. So, how would you like to
go about this? I think a lot of people go with Yes Man just because they have the most control over everything.
So, why, give me your argument on why. I know honestly, you have a lot more experience with this game than I do. I'm happy to just give in my ideas, but why did, when I told you we were going to do this episode, you deduce that Mr. House was better than Yes Man?
Yeah, so originally I was a big Yes Man supporter. I've always sort of played Yes Man in my really serious playthroughs. That would be my faction of choice, right? Because I figured, well, I'm a good person. I can, theoretically create whatever society, the utopia. I can make sure to negotiate with all of the different factions and get them on my side, not have to kill them or steal anything, or lie to people. And, that would be good. But you can also make some kind of argument about Yes Man. It's well, if the player is not a good person, then they can do just the opposite, right? And Yes Man does not have any controls, right? He does whatever the player tells him to. He can't say no. Until the end. But even then, that's not really a concern. The concern is that the player themselves sort of becomes a dictator for a time, and whether or not they create some kind of representative government that limits their power, they themselves still act as a dictator for that short amount of time where they are commanding Yes Man to reform society, right?
Yes, but I guess the thing is what is the difference between you being a dictator and Mr. House being a dictator? Especially since you have all the Securitrons now, and you can just use it. Obviously, I guess it would be that capitalist grit that Mr. House has that you don't probably have.
Yeah, right. So, one of the things about the Yes Man playthrough is that you have to go and kill Mr. House, right? And there's really, no way to kill Mr. House, I think, in a Kantian fashion where it's justified, right? If you think, okay, well, a better society is going to come, it's better off for everyone, right? Everyone else alive to get rid of Mr. House and create, using his robots and things, a prosperous society. And you can do that in your mind because the game ends right after the last quest.
No, they do still tell you what happens, especially.
Yeah, they tell you a little bit, and it is definitely prosperous, right?
It is prosperous. Good Springs, especially. I would say Mr. House and and Yes Man have the best endings for Good Springs.
Yeah, definitely. That's basically one of my biggest concerns with the Yes Man playthrough.
But you kill the Brotherhood of Steel. But you kill the Brotherhood of Steel with Mr. House. So what's the difference between killing Mr. House and killing the Brotherhood of Steel?
I think the problem is that I don't think you can justify just going in and killing Mr. House the same way that you can justify getting rid of the Brotherhood of Steel, right? I don't think Mr. House has done anything as heinous as, going out and just killing people for their technology and stealing it.
But Mr. House,
Whereas
clearly,
Mr.
Mr. House
House
is
has
clearly
basically just been
bloodthirsty.
trying to take care of his little strip area.
But he's bloodthirsty but it's seemingly in his ideal world the Brotherhood of Steel will be dead. So isn't that wrong as well? But he's not. I'm guessing it's because he hasn't actually done it yet outside the Courier's help.
I mean, obviously, that's a point of contention, right? I think it is plausibly justifiable for Mr. House to get rid of the Brotherhood of Steel. But I don't think it's plausibly justifiable to follow Yes Man's order, or, what he says, and just go walk into the Lucky 38, which is the Mr. House's casino, go up the elevator, hack into his terminal, and just kill him, right?
Mm-hmm. But I guess, is there any way to divorce killing either of them and the societies? And would you say the stronger point is who you have to kill in the process? Or would you say is that the fact that Mr. House is likely going to have a more longevity society, especially since he's on medicine that you can possibly give to the people? There's a quest to do that.
Yeah.
But
so
it seemingly like he would do it for longer, and he would. But Mr. House also has no successors. But I guess he just intends to live as long as he can. He's 200 years old, I believe.
Yeah, I that's probably his plan, is just live as long as possible. Yeah, I guess that is definitely a negative to him. There's not really any kind of future plans for, what's going to take over after him. He has all this technology. Maybe he thinks that the Brotherhood's going to take that over, right? And leave everyone destitute.
The question is again, why is Mr. House, again, the fact that Mr. House is it just because Mr. House is going to live longer than you and therefore probably lives still longer than you? Or do we know? I mean, do we know? Or I guess your original point you gave to me about Yes Man, the fact that there was no one to replace you with Yes Man, is the bigger point of contention who you have to kill in the process, or the societies that you will leave off, about which would go to shit first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one thing I want to say is that, as a Kantian, someone who cares a whole lot about the means to the ends, I think that probably Mr. House, the playthrough, is the pro-Kantian, or, the Kantian permissible playthrough, right? But that's not necessarily the most prosperous in general for everyone. I think, in the long run, the best society is probably going to be with the NCR. Because even though that there's a lot of faults they have, and, they're not giving voter rights, and there's corruption with the people in the Mojave, it still is, at its core, a democratic society, representative government. And so I think, in the long run, when you start out with a kind of democracy or kind of representation, that over time it will end up getting better for people.
Don't you have to kill Mr. House with NCR as well?
Yeah, I believe so.
So still Mr. House is the more Kantian playthrough.
That's if you don't care about the means at all, though, right? I think like the Kantian playthrough is something like Mr. House, but
and definitely not Kaizar. 100% not Kaizar.
Yeah, definitely not.
Kaizar is a possible pipe dream utilitarian playthrough, but we basically burn the utilitarian argument.
Yeah, well, he takes slaves and crucifies people, just random people. So I think we can probably say, as a Kantian, can't do that. That's evil.
Yes.
But I think if we take off the Kantian hat, like you were saying, and think, okay, well, what's the best in general to make people the most prosperous? I think that's going to be with the NCR.
But why is Good Spring prosper more under Mr. House than the NCR?
I think with what you're referring to with the ending slides when you complete the game, it is with Mr. House, or with the Yes Man, initially, Good Springs and the surrounding areas is definitely more prosperous. But I think in the long run, it will end up creating a government and a society that is better for everyone in the long run, because you have the basis of the representation. it takes a lot of effort and force to create a kind of democratic society, and that's really like the starting point that you have to get to in order to have a prosperous society that like respects people's rights and different things. And there's hiccups along the way, right? Even in America, there's times in our history where we've regretted what we've done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over the long run, it's a upward track in prosperity and civilization progress.
So that was a surprise turn. That was definitely a surprise turn, but I do think you were right in the sense that the Mr. House playthrough probably gave you more of a lore, But yeah, that's I guess then I think we have your answer. That honestly does make sense. It does. I think again you obviously know these people a lot more than I do. Do you want to discuss the ideas about nuclear aftermaths at all, or should we leave that here? I guess the ideas about nuclear aftermaths. I guess I really don't know.
Yeah, I think we can leave that here. I'm not sure if it's incredibly relevant to each of the factions in New Vegas, but I will say that there is definitely an argument to be made on Yes Man's behalf for if you are a good person and you can, with Mr. House's power, set up the prosperous society right away, right? Then that's definitely something to consider, right? You can displace the NCR and become a better NCR without the corruption, right? Maybe that's something you can do, and that's sort of theoretical though, because Yes Man just does whatever is in your mind as the player.
Yes, I mean outside of having to kill Mr. House. But I guess that's the only way.
But that's just as a Kantian.
But that's
if you take off the hat, then Yes Man's pretty good.
If we were to have a successor, if there was a possibility to have a successor.
Yeah. So at the very end of the battle at Hoover Dam, Yes Man comes to talk to you and says, "I'm updating my firmware. I won't be a Yes Man anymore." Right. And so presumably he's going to code himself, or you're going to help him with creating a new personality for him where he does say no, he is more assertive, and sort of has the ideals that you as the character or the player have in mind for the future.
So he would possibly be a leader?
Yeah, possibly. It sort of future-proofs whatever society you think is going to come about.
Mm-hmm.
Or should come about.
And I mean that's a little just tiny little comment about free will in general, about about the idea of a person that would have to say yes to everything is just an interesting concept. I know there's
definitely
a little comedy movie that was about a person that had to say yes, and I think that person gets into interesting situations, but not exactly the discussion we were having, but I believe that basically resolves itself. Well, we're getting at the 1 hour mark. Joshua, I guess. Is there where else people could find you, or anything else you'd like to say?
I guess just thank you for having me on. I'm sure you'll probably tag me in your Instagram post or something.
Of course.
Thanks everyone for listening. I guess my final say is that I'm a Mr. House supporter because I want to be limited in what I do to make sure that everything I do is the right thing, not just the end goal. But if I take off that hat, I think that either the NCR or Yes Man is definitely a viable option and supportable.
I guess I don't know if I feel like I've only had 6 hours experience of the game, so I still feel like Joshua definitely has a lot better knowledge. I'm still doubt the NCR a little bit. Again, it seems like, but I think I'd probably still go Mr. House or Yes Man. But I do understand NCR. I definitely say no to Kaizar unless possibly his society would be prosperous, but clearly since he possibly intentionally misunderstands the Roman Empire, that's a problem. So yeah, I'm not going to give us firm an answer on this one, as I do in other times where I give very firm answers, but this was just an awesome time to talk to a person who's really good with philosophy, and I can't tell you guys, so thank you everyone for listening to this episode. I hope you all loved it, and next 2 weeks, I can't tell you exactly which comes first, but we will definitely have Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, and we will have new Pokemon Snap assessing how realistic the game is. Spoiler alert, it's not that realistic, but there's always a kernel of truth in everything. So everyone, this has been Philosophy of Video Game Philosophy. Bye!